Alright, got a quick little video here today. Just wanted to go over an interesting kind of mechanic that I saw from the balance manifesto that could lead to some interesting build combinations for this upcoming league. And that is with this Juggernaut. I don't even really want to call it a rework, but the change to the Juggernaut ascendancy node, that they're splitting it into two nodes. And one of the outcomes of the currently existing Unbreakable notable is it's gaining this line right here. Grants 8% of armor to apply to elemental damage from hits. When I first saw that, I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I mean, conceptually, like as a mechanic, it's actually really interesting. I like it a lot. It's something different. But at only 8% of your armor, it's not that substantial of a mitigation source unless you have a pretty hefty amount of armor, which is still mostly true. It's not terrible even if you don't have a ton, but I think if you really want a lot of value out of this, you're probably pushing 100,000 armor for a hardcore character, or maybe even more. If you get even higher, it becomes really insane really fast. But while just kind of talking on stream about some random things about it, we were on the topic, I think, of Divine Flesh characters, and it just randomly clicked for me that this could work really well with something like Divine Flesh. And I've run some numbers. I've got the calculations here. So basically, when you have 8% of your armor applying to elemental damage, if we assume you have 125,000 armor, that gives you a nice, neat, even 10,000 armor versus the elemental damage. The thought process here is, because of how armor works, the higher your armor versus the lower the hit, essentially, the more armor you have versus the smaller the hit, the more effective mitigation your points of armor give you. And because of the way damage is taken, if you have a source of incoming elemental damage, and say it was incoming cold damage, if you instead take that as half cold and half fire, it becomes two hits that are half the damage each. So when it comes to your armor calculation, your armor actually becomes stronger because it's the total baseline that you are taking before armor is the same, but it being two smaller hits makes your armor better. And so that's where this got started. And you can see I put down some numbers. These are all working off a 25,000 base hit. This is before any Res or anything. So baseline, you can see a 25,000 base hit versus 75% elemental resistance and 10,000 effective armor from the Juggernaut node. Results in about 4,700 damage taken. If you had, say, 90% res instead, this is basically what the Juggernaut could look like with melding. If you were somehow able to get all the way up to 90, it's harder now because they nerfed it, which is another reason why these jewels kind of became interesting. But you can see 1,388 damage taken, which really quickly, let me jump back over here. You can see melding is going to have basically minus 4% when you divine it properly to max all res. So instead of having to get your single res up to 90, you basically have to get it to 94, which would then be 90. So melding is harder to get all the way up now, which adds more value to these. But anyway, you can see just shy of 1,400 damage taken from a 25k base hit, which if you just had the 90 res, this is 2,500 damage because you just take 10% of it. So at that point, this the Juggernaut armor node is actually almost cutting that in half from there, which is really good. And then this is just kind of explaining that same thing. Splitting the damage into different types increases the power of the armor for the remaining damage. So you can see in this initial example where you have 75% res, if this is all taken as one element, you take 4,700 damage. If you were to split it between two elemental damages taken, it becomes about 3,800 damage taken. So you can see that's roughly 20% less damage taken, which is pretty dang powerful. And there's kind of two ways to go about this with Legion Jewels, which is Glorious Vanity and Lethal Pride. Glorious Vanity has the Zabakwa Jewel, which this is Ellie taken as Chaos. So the part you take as Chaos is no longer subject to the Juggernaut node because it's not elemental damage anymore. The Juggernaut node is only for elemental damage. But there's a lot of other advantages here. That it being Chaos and stuff. But so you can see I put in the Glorious Vanity just to show the keystone if anybody's not familiar. All damage taken bypasses energy shield. That's basically the downside. And then 50% of elemental damage taken as Chaos with max Chaos res. So in this situation, you want to be scaling max Chaos res. And that's kind of the melding alternative. That's basically what both of these function as, is alternatives to melding, because you could just do the new Juggernaut thing and use melding of the flesh. These are just different ways to go about it that specifically have some cool synergy with the fact that the Juggernaut has armor applying to elemental damage. So anyway, 25,000 base hit again. We're assuming 80% elemental resistances here because this is we're assuming kind of geared characters. So even if you weren't doing any melding or jewels or anything, if you're on the Jugg side of the tree, you can probably get all your resists up to 80 pretty easily just from some passives. It's not too much. But so 25,000 base hit, 80% Ellie res, and your armor, you end up taking about 3,500 damage. If you add in Zabakwa and you get to 90 Chaos res, which isn't super free, but it's achievable, it turns into roughly 2,600 damage taken, which that's roughly equivalent for this level of a hit. This is roughly equivalent to what characters currently take with melding, because, you know, if you're at melding and you don't have any other, not counting other random sources of like damage reduction and whatever, a 25,000 base, if you have 90 all res, is 2,500. This is 2,600, so it's slightly worse than just having 90 all res, but you don't have that melding downside. You instead have this Zabakwa jewel, and actually against smaller hits, because of this new Jugg node, you would be more effective than melding is currently on anything non-Jugg that doesn't have access to that. The results similar to 90% all res without Jugg node. It'll be slightly weaker against large hits, stronger against smaller hits because of armor. And the main thing here on this one is it's extremely valuable versus anything with Ellie Pen, which a good number of the Uber Pinnacle bosses that get Elemental Pen added to their abilities. Notably, Shaper in both Uber Shaper and Uber Elder has Cold Pen. I think Elder might even have some Cold Pen. Exarch has Fire Pen. Eater of Worlds may have Lightning Pen. I'm not 100% sure. Same with Maven. I'm not 100% sure. But anything that has Ellie Pen, doesn't matter which ones, half of that damage is getting taken against Chaos. So if something had like 30 pen, your 80 res becomes 50 res. But your 90 Chaos stays 90 Chaos because they don't have Chaos Pen. So this specifically for Uber boss type stuff, if you can get a character tanky with it, is insane. And then there's also the other thing of now that you're scaling Chaos res, it opens up the only build that I've really thought about. I haven't POB'd any builds. I'm waiting for patch note stuff. Opens up the option of like Forbidden Right as your main skill because you're scaling Chaos res, and Forbidden Right builds just need to scale their Chaos res anyway. So kind of cool. Some nice synergy there. But yeah. So pretty close to current melding levels of defense. Different way to invest, isn't subject to the melding nerf. Really good against Ellie Pen. But then the other option is this Lethal Pride Jewel with the Rakiata keystone, which is tempered by war. 50% cold and lightning taken as fire damage. And then you get 50% less cold and less lightning res. So that means basically whatever your cold or lightning res are, they get cut in half. And that ends up being similar to melding, because if we do this same assumption of you're going to be at roughly 80% baseline resists, you would need now to get your cold and lightning to 160, because then they would get cut in half down to 80 to be capped out. So that's 80% extra cold res and 80% extra lightning res you need for a total of 160% extra res. Melding is currently either 180 or 210. I forget what the bottom of the roll, if it's minus, it is minus 70. So melding, you actually need 210 extra res to cancel it out. This one you need 160, so it's actually quite a bit more manageable. And then in this situation, we're assuming you would scale max fire res, which is similar to a melding thing, right? You just scale that one res. So anyway, we go back, the same baseline versus 80% res. This is, without using the jewel. It's again like 3,500 damage taken. Now, if you did this but added in the Rakiata and you got to 90% fire res, your fire damage taken is all the way down to 1388, so like 1400. Which again, that's this up here, right? Because it's just 90% res with the Jugg node. This is insanely high mitigation because, again, currently a melding character that just has melding and 90 res would be taking 2500 damage. So this is getting close to half of that. And then if it's cold or lightning damage, it's 1868 damage taken. So not quite as good, but still pretty damn impressive and still better than current 90% res melding characters. And again, so this one ends up with extremely high mitigation. It's pretty dang close to just having straight 90 all res with the Jugg node. The straight 90 all res with the Jugg node is here. The like 1400 damage taken regardless. This is 1400 on one type or about 1860 on the other two, 1870 on the other two. But again, it's similar investment to melding. It's actually a decent bit less investment than melding. You get the benefits of potentially the lethal pride hitting some other nodes depending on where you put it. I was just putting it here to show the keystones. The lethal pride actually just buffs all the other nodes as well. And it's pretty dang good against cold and lightning pen. So like Shaper, this would be insane against. Uber Elder, insane against. The one drawback of this one is it becomes vulnerable to minus max fire res and to fire pen in general. It doesn't really necessarily help you against fire pen because you're still taking fire as fire. But the biggest thing is specifically, like, it's really specifically for something like Uber Exarch. He has the those ground effects do, I think, minus 10 max fire res. Since fire res is the one you're scaling, that's a bit unfortunate. But for general purpose stuff, this one's really, really promising defensively. And then, I mean, this is just a single baseline kind of defensive thing, right? Like, you would have your Juggernaut tree. This would be the new Unbreakable. You'd probably get like Unstoppable, Unflinching, and then whatever your last point is, whatever you want it to be. I haven't done any builds with it. Just a really cool defensive kind of mechanic that's going to be available, I think, and something to keep an eye on once we get the patch notes and stuff. Yeah. Good Juggernaut potential. Still has like no damage on the Ascendancy. But if you want something that might end up with really, really heavy elemental mitigation, and you want something that is essentially a replacement to the nerfed melding of the Flesh Jewel, something to keep in mind. I thought it was cool. I might try to make a build for it. We'll see. But yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for watching.